I am nervous about the day when the federal bureaucrats return to power.
We're also learning that the last census in 2020, they've acknowledged that they have errors in that census. They acknowledged that they did it wrong.
We're in a rare moment in August of 2025 when sane people are in charge of the federal government. Always the goal of the left is to manipulate the process. If you don't have consent to the governed, you don't have domestic tranquility.
When inflation jumps, when you hear the national debt is over $37 trillion, do you ever stop and think to yourself, maybe it's about time I bought some gold? Whether as a hedge against inflation or just as a sensible diversification, Birch Gold believes every American should own physical gold, and they want to make it super easy for you. Right now, until the end of September, through September 30th, if you're a first-time gold buyer, Birch Gold's offering a rebate of up to $10,000 in free metals on qualifying purchases. So if you want to claim eligibility and start the process, first you request an info kit. Text my name, Larry, to 989898. Plus, Birch Gold can help you roll an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold, and you're still going to be eligible for a rebate in free metals of up to $10,000. Make right now the time you contact Birch Gold. Take advantage of a rebate up to $10,000 when you buy by September 30th. Text my name, Larry, to 989898. Claim your eligibility today. Again, Larry, text Larry to 989898. Do it today. Election integrity is always on the minds of every American. It's actually so destructive to our constitutional republic that at the end of the day, after election day, half of the electorate isn't confident in the results of that election one way or the other. And it's been this way for quite some time. How do we fix that once and for all? President Trump has been trying to focus on this. He's made a lot of statements recently. What's legal? What's constitutional? What's effective? What will actually fix the problem? Let's go to the expert. He is J. Christian Adams. He's the president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. He used to work in the Justice Department on these issues, and he's been fighting the good fight daily there at Public Interest Legal Foundation for many years now. Mr. Adams, thanks for joining us, sir.
Thanks, Larry. Hi.
Hi. First of all, do you accept my premise that this is so deteriorating that it's like every election cycle, there are people who just don't trust the results of the last election?
It's called consent to the governed. If you don't have consent to the governed, you don't have domestic tranquility. And the more disputes we have, the later we get results, the later ballots arrive in the mail, the less consent of the governed we have, because people start to doubt the system, and it's very dangerous.
Yeah, and listen, it's nothing new. I think everybody goes back and looks at 2000 and the hanging chads in Florida and things like that. It does seem like it's never ended since then, that there's always something that the losing side of a presidential election will look at and focus on, and in some cases obsess about.
Remember the good old days when we went to bed at about 11 o'clock? I remember 1984, I think I went to bed at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Not quite that early, but you get the point.
Well, Jimmy Carter did that year.
Right.
Walter Mondale, actually. Sorry.
Right. Yes, 80 for Carter. Both of them were. But 80. So we long for the good old days where we knew the results of the election the night of the election. And I will tell you, Larry, the number one culprit in changing that recently is mail voting. Mail voting, ballots arriving late, ballots having to be processed.
Yeah.
Not easy when you have to do it with the post office.
Yeah, thank you. It's so funny. I remember the last couple of election cycles, we had media personalities bending over backwards, cable news anchors saying, we might not know the results for a few days, and that's normal. That's the process working right. No, that's not normal. That isn't how the process should work. So you say it's mail-in ballots and also these drop boxes, right? Because President Trump recently said that he wants to do away with that.
Yeah, that's the main culprit. That's why Florida, for example, gets results the night of the election, because number one, they don't have expansive mail voting. They have the good old system where you go to vote like most people grew up with, but they also start processing the ballots early. In other words, they're getting the votes moved through the system ahead of time, so we don't have to wait for 3 weeks like we did in the last election for some congressional seats. We're getting it done ahead of time.
That's a great point. I mean, we'll talk about mail-in ballots and the ability to mess around with those and get improper ballots submitted. But we'll set that aside for a second. The tabulating of these ballots. Why is it Arizona and Pennsylvania and Georgia and California, why do they hold all of the mail-in ballots and drop box ballots and they don't count them until after the day of votes? You just said Florida does it the opposite. Why doesn't everybody count them ahead of time?
There was conventional wisdom for a time that Pennsylvania adopted that you don't want to count them early because you might leak results and influence the election. And some people, after the close of the election, the problem is that causes a delay. And secondly, Florida addressed this by making it a felony. You go to jail if you leak any results. So you're not allowed to be tabulating and leaking and revealing outcomes, but they're starting to process ballots days before the election is over, before Election Day. And that's why Florida gets results the night of the election.
All right. So that's one big problem with mail-in ballots right now. The other problem just has to do with basic ballot integrity. Explain to me why mail-in ballots and drop box ballots are more vulnerable to illegal ballot tampering than day of voting.
I learned this when I was at the Justice Department voting section 20 years ago, and I worked on a case in Mississippi where mail ballots were used to swing the outcome of elections illegally. They had runners, they had notaries who would canvass a place called Noxubee County. You could look it up. And they would collect ballots from people in the mail. They'd follow the mailman. They'd grab the ballots out of the mailbox. They would go into the house, and they would sometimes vote the ballots straight up. I put a witness on the stand named Susie Wood in federal court who testified that she always let a ballot harvester vote for her because the ballot harvester knew the best way to vote. And the judge asked, Miss Wood, do you know how to read and write? She said, oh yeah, I just want the runner to vote my ballot. So there's a culture of criminality, a culture of breakdown of law and order where mail ballots are the central tool for the bad guys to swing the results of elections because they have a better organization behind the cloak of secrecy. When you have elections in the ballot, in the polling place, like most of us are familiar with, you have observers, you have election officials, sometimes you even have a police officer. That wasn't happening in rural Mississippi.
And this is not news. You just said you uncovered this 20 years ago when you were in the Justice Department. And I remember reading about an independent study on our election integrity here in America. I believe it was Jimmy Carter and James Baker at the time. You help me out here. Didn't they come up with basically conclusions researching elections here in America? And didn't they conclude that mail-in ballots were a really bad idea?
Yes. How about that? Bipartisan agreement on an election administration issue. How quaint. Roll out the 45s. So, it was James Baker, Jimmy Carter, the Baker-Carter Commission. They said voting should be done in person and voting should have voter ID. Two incredibly basic ideas that the left now hates with a burning rage, yet was once a point of bipartisan agreement.
So why didn't they take that? What's the point of having a commission to reach a conclusion when it's just going to be ignored and they do the opposite?
Well, look, I'm a big fan of commissions that are ignored because I'm on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. But I will tell you that that it's not being ignored. You're talking about it. I'm talking about it. I testified to Congress a couple weeks ago. It got brought up there by members of Congress. So the good news is, Larry, it's not totally being ignored. It's just being ignored a little too much.
All right. So President Trump, with his announcement, I think it was about a week and a half ago, he said that he wants to do away with mail-in ballots. He also said, by the way, that we're the only country who does this. Is that true? Are other countries that utilize the democratic process, whether they're a parliamentary system or a constitutional republic, do they only do in-person balloting?
By and large, what he said was accurate. There's a couple of exceptions to the contrary. I believe the UK a little bit and a couple of other, but not many. So he's largely correct. I'm sure PolitiFact will say totally untrue because that's what they do. That's just their business model. But the reality is that most countries understand that this is a vulnerability that you don't want to have in your elections. You don't want to give the guys who deliver you your neighbor's mail all the time a say in who our elected leaders are. There's a general consensus around the world that mail is not the right way to go.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember during the pandemic when everyone was saying, "Oh, it's perfectly safe to put your ballot in the mail." And I would say, "Oh, really? Okay, then put $1,000 cash in the mail. And right on the outside of the envelope, this envelope contains $1,000 in cash. And then mail it to me and see what happens." Because that's what you're doing with the ballot. Everybody knows what's in that envelope. It's pretty distinctive and it's pretty valuable.
Yeah, and if I was a nefarious mailman, not that they exist, you could take if you have a certain zip code or neighborhood that votes a certain way, or how about someone with a sign in their front yard, right?
Yeah.
And they put it in the envelope in their mailbox. Like what could go wrong there? Oh, I just happened to drop this ballot, and it just creates another layer of vulnerability in the system.
And I think that they came up with the mail-in and the drop-ins. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I'll take them at their word. They want to make it easy and convenient for people to vote. And you keep hearing that talking point all the time. It should be much easier for people to vote in America. It should be much more convenient for people to vote. First of all, I don't find it that difficult. I don't know why it's so hard for people to vote. But that said, is it really out of convenience? And by the way, should convenience and ease of voting be the primary factor in determining our election laws?
That's a great question, Larry, and it's sort of a philosophical and historical one. Like, where are we in the continuum of convenience? We have a painting, I think it's from the National Gallery, hanging up on the wall here at PILF called Election Day, like 1855. And there's people like beaten up, there's drunks, it's all a public vote. It was chaos. And so we moved to the secret ballot. The Australian system is what it's called, the Australian ballot. And we developed a new way to do it. And how convenient should it be? Should you be able to sit on your couch with a remote and just,
Right.
Oh, I vote for X, or, off with his head? I mean, at some point, direct democracy is a danger. And the founders knew that. I know that it's very hip among some left-wing people like it on college campuses to always use the word democracy, but we're not a democracy. We're a democratic republic for good reason.
Right.
And that reason is democracies lead to bloodbaths. And so how much democracy is enough democracy? That's a question the legislative branches really need to decide, not judges, not the Brennan Center for Justice.
It is interesting, though, J. Christian Adams, that in the last couple of decades, we spent a lot of money and spilled a lot of American blood bringing democracy to a couple of countries that didn't have any experience with it. And when they had their first elections, and it was a great moment that the people of Afghanistan and Iraq finally got to have their voices heard in a free and fair election, they didn't use mail-in ballots, did they?
One of my dear friends from DOJ, Christy McCormick, who's now on the Election Assistance Commission, when you said that, Larry, I imagined the pictures I saw of her flying around Iraq in a helicopter. Things were so bad at the DOJ voting section, Christy wanted to go to Afghanistan and Iraq. And so she was flying around setting up their elections. And she deserves a lot of credit for that. And you're right, the story she tells of the first time people got to vote in a real election was really a profound moment for a lot of people.
Yeah, and they used the purple finger to make sure that people didn't vote twice. I'd be fine going back to that. I think it would be cool to have purple finger. They should be
right. That's a great. Instead of this silly "I voted" sticker, let's have purple thumbs.
Yeah, I mean, it should be red, white, and blue. To be fair, we're American. To hell with the purple. All right. So the big question on this issue, and then we'll turn to one other topic. The president says he wants to do this. He wants to do away with mail-in ballots and drop box ballots. That means by presidential action or at the federal level. J. Christian Adams, can that be done at the federal level? Should that be done at the federal level?
Okay, let's pick up the can first. There's a couple things that can happen. Number one, there's a lot of money that goes to states out of the Help America Vote Act fund through the EAC. I know a bunch of Washington acronyms, but these are federal agencies, federal dollars. Millions of dollars went to states to set up mail voting in 2020 in the pandemic. How about millions of dollars being given out only if you don't have mail voting? Make the conditions flip the other direction. That's one thing that can be done. The other thing, Larry, is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal court, has said that it is illegal to accept ballots late after the election. In other words, they have to be coming in by election day. That may end up at the Supreme Court, but the good news is the Justice Department could enforce that law. And so there's a lot of states that let mail come in late. So that's the can question. Can something be done? I just gave you two ideas.
But then there's the question of should, because we've had these conversations over the years, and you're very resistant to the idea of the federal government dictating how states conduct these elections.
We're in a rare moment in August of 2025 when sane people are in charge of the federal government. Normally, that isn't the case. Normally, it's bureaucrats, many of whom have been fired. Normally, it's political appointees who went to Harvard who are destroying the country. And often it's left-wing politicians who are in charge. That has been my experience in my life, with very few exceptions, this day being one of them.
Yeah.
I am nervous about the day when the federal bureaucrats return to power, where the status quo that we're familiar with reemerges. And I know what crazy ideas they will come up with if federal authority is that clear. I like it better the way the founders wrote the Constitution. The founders in 1787 recognized the threat of centralized control, recognized the inherent broken nature of man, and said, we want to decentralize power. We want to give the states authority to run their own elections. And that's why they put it in the Constitution, that the states have the power to set the times, the places, and the manners of holding elections.
And by the way, the last time we had a major piece of federal legislation dictating how states conduct elections, it was, I believe, the motor voter bill that allowed people to register to vote at their local DMV. And well, that, I think you've expressed in the past, was a disaster.
Largely so.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. As you just mentioned, we're a constitutional republic. We're not a direct democracy. Thank God and the founders for that. Redistricting and the census that we take every decade is a big part of how that constitutional republic works. Let's first take up the census. Do you believe that it is the constitutional requirement right now that all persons, whether legally in the country or not, whether citizens or not, shall be counted in a census for representation in Congress?
Yeah, this is to figure out how many seats each state gets. And that is a different question than how do we divide up the state internally when we draw the districts. So the first question is the apportionment. Mm-hmm. And that's how many people are in Texas, how many are in California, how many are in Utah. And a lot of very conservative scholars who I respect say that you have to count everybody, that that's not an option because it's constitutional.
It doesn't say all citizens, it says all persons.
Correct. And so, you know, that's a tough call, but that's what people I respect, and I think most of your people hearing us would respect these particular scholars.
So let me just explore it a little further. And I know you're not a constitutional expert here, but just in terms of the mechanics of it, are there any provisions like for how long? Let's say somebody's traveling into the country and living here for a summer, right? And they're here for 3 months. Do they get counted in the census?
Yeah, anybody who's supposed to fill out a census form would get counted. And that's, you know, the census is a crazy, wild snapshot. Even though it's crazy and wild, it's still a snapshot. And you have to have a time demarcation. And look, I know some people don't like the outcome of this. Like, how dare the non-citizens get in? I get it. But we're stuck with this relatively well-accepted constitutional jurisprudence that you do the snapshot of everybody who's here.
Yeah.
And that's how the state, now that is not how you draw the district lines. That's a different issue.
We can get to that in a second, but it is, and I get you. I feel like there could be a compromise though, where yes, we'll count non-citizens, but if it's a non-citizen who is actually living here illegally and broke our laws, why should they get counted for representation?
Yeah, I wonder, like, or if there was like a war going on, and like, you know, the invading army, the British on Tangier Island and Chesapeake Bay in the 1810 census. Well, that didn't really line up, but you get the point. And like,
I ain't counting those redcoats, Christian. Not going to happen. All right. And then what about the districting fight that we're seeing right now? Of course, Texas is moving forward with their redistricting. Now, Gavin Newsom's threatening, although his state requires him to pass a state ballot measure. Is this something new? They're acting like this is so unprecedented what's going on right now.
Yeah, Public Interest Legal Foundation and myself, we have to take some of the blame and plead guilty to this. We actually brought the case in Texas, or we defended Galveston County in their redistricting fight with the left a couple of years ago. And we made a legal argument that uncorked all of this.
Hmm.
I'm not going to get into the details, it was called Jingles 1. We said you can't build a coalition district. You can't combine Black and Latino to create a Democrat district. You're not allowed to sue over that. Well, we won in the Fifth Circuit, in New Orleans, Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And the court basically blew up coalition districts, and Texas congressional plan has like 5 coalition districts. So the court greenlighted a redraw in the middle of the census because of our case when we defended Galveston. So that's what's happening in Texas. The court greenlighted a redraw. So it's a weird situation that's getting national news, but it's all based on a single court case. Texas is not doing something wacky. They're responding to a change in the law by the Fifth Circuit.
Yeah, which was greenlit by that Fifth Circuit case, thanks to PILF bringing it. And that's a remarkable aspect of it. We're also learning now, of course, that the last census in 2020, if I remember right, the Commerce Department does the census, right?
Yeah.
They've acknowledged that they have errors in that census. They acknowledged that they did it wrong, and certain states should be getting more apportionment right now, more delegates or representatives in the House of Representatives. So why haven't we redone that census?
Because it can't be untangled, Larry. Some of the craziest stuff ever happened in that census, where after the data were compiled, the Census Bureau during the Biden administration started doing like this crazy ghost analysis. Like, because they're trying to make everything anonymous, they started making stuff up. They started hiding, like there will be like census blocks with all these people in it where all there is a bridge. And it was an effort to make it anonymous so you couldn't deconstruct the answers in the census. And it created this disaster situation with fake data, largely, of course, to achieve political ends. You know, that's always the goal of the left, is to manipulate the process. But you're right. It's impossible to untangle this mess because the way they hid all the truth in the final census report.
Why is the census not the most transparent thing in the world? First of all, it's so important. It's so, and not people forget, not only is it for apportionment for the members of the House of Representatives, but that then translates to the Electoral College as well. So that's a game changer. Why all the mystery? Why all the lack of transparency in something like this?
Well, there's a bunch of reasons. I'll give you the craziest one. There's a view that certain underrepresented communities don't respond to the census. So they had to do sampling, and they had to do concoction of data to boost up answers from certain places.
Wait, so the census isn't actually just a raw counting of the people. They use sample methods, which is a statistical approach, of saying, okay, historically, this group, let's say people who eat apples every day, they historically don't respond to the census. So we're just going to extrapolate and assume that there are more of those apple eaters in this community than we've actually counted. So
that's what happened in 2020. And when I learned this, I was outraged because it benefits people who don't answer the questions.
Right.
And it has a political and partisan implication, which isn't hard to figure out. Anybody hearing us knows what it does.
Yeah.
And so this is what happened in 2020 that had never happened before. And it's an underreported story. You could get some very good people on your show who know the ins and outs of this scam that took place in the 2020 census.
Well, we'll try to do that. But in the meantime, the president has called for a new census. Is that feasible?
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd have to fund it, of course, and you'd have to manpower it. States, by the way, Larry, can do their own census. Massachusetts does. And they actually have a citizenship question on their census, unlike the federal census. So there's a lot of options.
Wait a minute. Liberal Democrat Elizabeth Warren, bastion of progressive ideology and woke politics, they ask a citizenship question on their census?
Correct. And PILF got a bunch of the data from it, and that's how we found a bunch of non-citizens who were registered to vote in Massachusetts.
Amazing. Amazing. All right. And that leads us to our final question that I want to ask you, the final topic, and that has to do with voter rolls. You just said you found a bunch of non-citizens on the voter rolls. I talked about motor voter. The idea that non-citizens aren't registering to vote right now is laughable. Of course they are. This is hardly ever investigated, though. And I understand states have budget priorities with law enforcement and what they're going to go after. And this probably falls pretty low on the ladder in terms of things that they want to prioritize. And it probably takes quite a bit of investigative effort and man hours to be able to get to the bottom of this. You've been able to do it in certain states, as you just mentioned. How bad is this? How many non-citizens, if you can even venture to guess, currently are registered? And secondary question, do they participate in voting if they are registered?
Oh, they totally. I could give you stacks of reports where we have the names of people who registered as non-citizens and voted. And oftentimes, Larry, I think I've told you before, this is not like a conspiracy. This is like they were shoved voter registration information at DMV. Right. Yeah. They were shoved it at a third-party event. They didn't know. They were told they could register. But we have one like in Pittsburgh. There's a great report called Stealing Your Vote. The PILF did. You can Google it. You can get it at our website. And we show you the letters that these non-citizens wrote, like, please take me off the voter rolls. I thought this was a student council election. I was told I'm allowed to register. Like, you hear it in their own voices, how they got conned into registering to vote.
So take, for example, California, which has a pretty significant number of non-citizens. This is a state, and I used to live there, where at the DMV, you do a touch screen. It immediately asks, do you want to register to vote? You say yes. One of the questions is, are you a citizen? You just move straight through it. No one's looking over your shoulder when you answer that question. You register, and then in California, every single registered voter, no matter what, will get a ballot mailed to them. They don't have to ask for it. They don't have to request it. You will get that ballot. So a non-citizen that easily can register and then receive a ballot and mail it in. And Christian Adams, nobody's looking. Nobody's watching.
No, it's like Nevada. Nevada has the same broken system where everybody gets a ballot. And it's called automatic mail voting. Like, they mail it out without requests. You just get it. And so you combine the dirty voter rolls of California and Nevada with this insane auto mail, and you get a disaster on your hands.
It's almost like it was planned that way.
Yeah, and they transformed the state of California, didn't they? I mean, if you ever need a nexus between your boring election rules and the culture and the political outcome and the allocation of power, just look at California. For all you sort of like, libertarian process people who don't think this stuff matters, then they pass laws to go after your food trucks or whatever the case may be.
You're doing the hard work at PILF, and I should remind everybody, PILF is a nonprofit entity. People can help you with your efforts, right? Because you're doing this, taking on this fight. Lord knows the left, the folks who are trying to make it as easy as possible for literally anybody to vote. They're well funded. How do you guys get funded, and how can people support what you're doing?
Yeah, we're a tax-deductible charity. Publicinterestlegal.org is where you can find out more. The left outfunds us in this area probably 200 to 1, if not higher. I mean, they have so many people, so many lawyers. When we litigate in court, the other side runs out of seats. I'm not kidding. Judge Dick Leon in D.C. once called it a traveling circus, that the other side, the left, has so many lawyers, there's not enough seats in the courtroom.
All right. So I want to make sure that people know that it's publicinterestlegal.org if they want to make sure that they join what you're doing and make sure that, because you are the watchdog, you are on top of this stuff and you're actually fighting these fights. And if you could wave a magic wand today, final question, and the one spell that you could cast on the United States of America to tighten up our voter integrity more than anything else, what would that be? What would you cast with your wand?
That is a terrific question. And since you made it a magic wand that I could do anything, I would make all of the left-wing groups, including the Brennan Center, disappear.
Here I thought you were going to do voter ID, no more mail-in ballots. No, get rid of the organizations. They're the problem.
Yeah, they are. They are.
We'll leave it at that. J. Christian Adams, thank you so much for the great work that you do. This was really informative, and I think at least educates everybody as to what's really going on there and what the real problems are. The solution, well, that's the next step, and we'll do that another time. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Larry.